All right, as it is 7 o'clock, we're going to go ahead and call the meeting to order and start the school board work session tonight. Up first is our administrative team presenting the budget adjustments for the REAP plan, and I'm going to turn it over to Superintendent Gersich.
All right, thank you, Chair Gaylor, members of the board, and the community public who are engaging as part of this process. Can people hear me okay? So. Is this out? Oh. It's not. Is that oh my booming? Okay, we'll try to use this as best we can. Gotta find the right spot for that. So obviously the test 1 2 test. There we go. Obviously, the purpose here tonight is to present to the board, to the public, and talk through what has taken a number of months and a lot of hours of work to kind of pull together. We'll talk about some generalized comments here and then kind of get into the list itself. I do know that earlier today there was some of this information that was kind of floating around the community. There was, I think, a vulnerability within our website that people were able to find this information. It's certainly disappointing because our goal was not to hide this. This was to strategically and very deliberately roll out this information. But I totally understand. Like, this has been a super stressful and difficult time for the district and for the community, and the waiting has been very difficult. And I get that. And it is, I think, hopefully somewhat relieving that while we're not here excited about information that we're presenting or even the process that we have to engage in, we have an opportunity now as a community to come together and discuss this and understand what is being proposed, understand why it's being proposed, and talk about the potential impact. And that's been a huge part of what our leadership team has done. And again, while this is not, something that is a pleasant process and people don't want to be in this position, I do appreciate that people have engaged highly throughout this process. And again, what we're presenting tonight is a culmination of several months of work and preparation by our district, particularly by our leadership team. And there's been a lot of voice throughout our community as a part of this plan. And I just want to make sure that independent of these reductions, we acknowledge that we have a high quality team, we have a high quality system, we have high quality families, and that doesn't change. We have amazing people that live here, we have amazing people that work here. And I just want to call out that there are so many positives. This was a thorough process and a challenging process for the team as well. And so it is, pulling together this plan is something that I think we believe is manageable. But certainly there's a lot of things in here that do have an impact, and that's our goal, is to try to help people understand what this plan is and some of the implications of it. So what I'm going to do here is start to kind of run through the list of adjustments. I will at times be asking members of our team to come up. There are some items that we're going to pause and go into a little more detail because I'm fully aware that these require some additional explanation. There are others at the first go through that I will just kind of touch on because I feel like maybe they seem a bit more self-explanatory. And there are some that kind of become redundant because there's similar things across the various lists. That isn't because I want to minimize anything, and certainly, board members, I would encourage you to ask any questions throughout this process to make sure that there's a clear understanding of what's being proposed. The last thing is I want to make sure people realize, and I think the board is aware of this, that initially when we went through this process with 6 different teams to look at our different categories of our budget, each group was given a target number to hit. Those targets were based on if everything else was to be based on the percentage of our budget that we spend, like an across the board reduction from each of those areas. So when some areas appeared more than others, that would mean it is a higher or less percentage of our total budget that we spend from a Fund 1 perspective in that area. I will say that not every item or every category ended up exactly as the target. Some ended up above target, some ended up below target. That's also the work of the team to look at the impact in its totality and to look at the big picture of what's in the best interest of our district. And there are some areas, again, that were prioritized because as a system, we say as educators, as community members, as parents, this is what we believe is in the best interest of the district as it comes to putting together this proposal. So again, that's kind of some of the backdrop as we run into this. So I will start on the first page and start running through some of these items. And again, basically there are 6 different categories. We'll start with administration, and then you have the different line items to go through. And the first item is HumanX vendor. That is a program that we have been using as a district as part of our hiring practices. So it's kind of a model or a method by which you would use to screen, hire, and otherwise applicants. We believe those are some things that we can do within our human resources department and do without. You'll see HumanX comes up another time later as part of one of the items. This is the actual software program. The other is some of the professional development and timing that would go into the training for the use of this tool. There's a number of things that you'll see that are clusters together of various budgets, whether it's supply budgets or capital budgets or some of these other things. This is a matter of saying, trying to find some way to utilize some efficiency. So reducing ad, utilizing online content and communications as part of the school board travel budget. Certainly there is sometimes less travel because we've discovered the ability to attend, for example, face training in an online format, not necessitating some of the travel or the mileage that otherwise would have been incurred, as well as some of the other things that we've done, between photos and board gifts. Some trimming of business office travel and some of the other, trainings, similar kind of logic within that is I have 3. 4, again, similar kinds of logic of trying to be efficient and reduce dues, membership, subscriptions, supplies. Item 5 is the first time you'll see a number of mentions about community education. So to make sure people realize community education is a different fund than our general fund. It is its own, it needs to self-sustain to run its programming. You're going to see a number of references to ensuring that the community education budget is utilized to cover the costs of things that would otherwise be a part of community education program. And so again, that would be in this case for usage of the director of community education, communications, and then also the fees for MailChimp, which is part of our communications tool, also utilized by community education. Item 7 is a freelance consulting person that was utilized. This person was paid monthly in order to basically monitor and manage the district's social media. And that has now been taken over and will continue as taken over by the director of communications, as opposed to hiring somebody outside to do that. Reallocation of district clerical personnel. So that's again a reallocation within nutrition services and community education. You're also going to see a number of things for Fund 2, food services. And again, making sure that things that are an expense for the purpose of providing meals are properly coded and utilizing food services funds. Food services and community education within our districts have healthy fund balances, and we have members of the team that can speak to questions that might be about community education and food services and their abilities to withstand some of those things coming into those programming codes. Pre-appointed physicals, I think that is fairly straightforward, that becomes a part of only the mandated positions that require those. Reducing district printing, you'll see a number of talks about printing and utilization of printers. I think in general, the more we can move into digital and make things available digitally, the better. I've noticed even just coming to our events, we seem to have a culture that is okay with scanning a QR code to look at your program versus having some of those paper kinds of things. I just think more and more that we can do that does make sense. This next one is a generalized restructuring of our teaching and learning and technology departments. I think there is some logical need to bring together just read it. Teaching and learning and technology. Technology should be really a part of how we instruct. It should be incorporated as a part of the teaching and learning process. So part of that is a philosophical alignment of those areas where you're bringing together some of those things. It also is, again, an acknowledgement of the need to reduce some of the non-classroom positions and supports that we have, potentially looking at ways we can reconfigure some of that in the future. So what you'll notice is a definition of our teaching and learning managers.
I'm watching the school board meeting.
An elementary teaching and learning manager, reconfiguration of positions into a singular.
Well,
Then having a
I want
coordinator
to
for technology. That person will be
here. I
more
gotta
in
go.
charge of the actual infrastructure network, making sure that our those kinds of services are working, hardware stuff comparatively to education technology, softwares, or other kinds of things that will be under the direction of a director of educational services, is what that's being called. And then the next portion of clustering those positions together would be basically consolidating tech integration, instructional coaches, and our current deans of students into expectedly 2 FTEs, 2 teaching and learning specialists that would basically replace, that would be tons of positions, one for the elementary and one for the secondary. It would also assume some of the integration support and essentially really bring that current department into a smaller group that is going to have to focus on prioritizing the work and the efforts of what has to get done within the scope of all the things that they currently do. You'll see a couple of notes. One is that it does require a model for peer evaluation to be reviewed. Our Director of Human Resources, Nina Schoenweiss, can explain a little bit about the work that's being done, because currently peer evaluations are done by those teaching and learning coaches that are part of this consolidation. They wouldn't be able to continue that forward because of all the clustering of the different positions. And then you'll also note that right now what we're suggesting is 1.0, the 2.0 be dispersed between the existing deans. That's because of the way the grant was written for federal dollars for pandemic relief funds to put those dean positions in for 2 years. And actually reviewing that application, it does make sense to see that through because of the revenues that come with it. But it does mean these additional responsibilities would be clustered into those. We would obviously then have to revisit those positions after that 2-year grant or those 2-year funds are up. And then the last item within the administrative categories, a moratorium on administrative performance payments. That is direct compensation to administrators. That is district administration, not building administration. That is not part of their contract. But they do have basically discretionary up to 3% of salary as a part of their contractual ability. That is at the discretion of the superintendent, and we are suggesting that for a year, those would not be paid out. The next category is instructional and people support. The one thing I have 2 notes on this one, I guess. This one from a target perspective looks relatively lean, but then the administrative one looks relatively heavy kind of a thing. You put these 2 together and cluster them. They do balance out because within the clustering of some of that teaching and learning plus the technology director, there are some positions that would be within also the instruction supports. You're also going to see other spaces where there are references to items that would also be instructional support. And one of the things when you see from a pupil support perspective that is not on this list would be some of those pupil support positions, including counselors, social workers, and psychologists. I think this was something that the team made clear that do not believe that in the current environment and the needs of our students, that would be something that the team would recommend. So those are, again, typical pupil support type positions that are not included as a part of this plan, but certainly were discussed in great detail as to justification as to why not. So within instructional and pupil support, we've got the reduced infrastructure and hardware. Again, you're talking about trying to find ways to be more efficient with the use of funds and the selection of those things. Again, we do have a team tonight that could help answer some of the questions about the specifics of some of these things. Reducing of general software and utilizing free tools and other kinds of budget reductions for website and internet service providers. Travel expenses you'll see as a part of that as well. Delayed computer replacement, notice that that would be part of the business education lab. One of the implications that isn't listed in there, but we have to make sure that we understand, if you are going to delay the replacement of labs, sometimes you have to expect that they may incur some additional tech support necessary as equipment becomes obsolete. Typically, you see more issues with that. So that is a potential implication of that, is that additional need for technological support if those machines start to lag or have issues. Reducing printers district-wide comes back to a little bit of the printing as well as the how much it costs to print copies on one printer versus kind of some of the other kinds of printers. Reduce 4.0 district-wide ESDs. You'll note that this is something, difficult times to hire staff at and positions at times. We had positions that were unfilled for quite a bit of our school year. There was some ability to make sure that we are meeting the needs of our students by basically finding efficiencies in scheduling in other areas. So it would be a matter of essentially saying we would continue some of that forward. Reducing instructional budget, again, tightening and finding different ways is a theme when you talk about supplies for other things we might be able to do without or be leaner. It does mean, again, in a lot of these things, there are budgets that are left behind to be able to purchase some of these items. So it's a reduction, not an elimination. Supplemental subscriptions, and again, reducing some of those, some of the online programs. Kind of the next 8, 9, and 10, as well as 13, we're talking about some of the restructuring of our health services. And Sarah Eichens is here tonight. She'd be able to explain some of those things as well. We talk about utilizing free staff development, reimbursement for health services for ECFE screening, the manager services that oversees the parochial school, as well as down to line item 13, where you talk about reduce a health associate vacancy and restructure some of the health services provided. Back up then to number 11, reducing travel, conferences, staff development. I will say there was, through our survey, a lot of people were asking about the ways we can do, feedback from staff and from external, the ways we can reduce some of those costs of attending conferences and professional development, in the coming year. And then reducing some of the other consumables is item 12 as a part of instructional support. And again, I'm not maybe getting into all the details on some of these, but certainly if there are questions later, we can dig back into those. All right, the next category is operations and maintenance. You'll notice the first one, there's a number of different line items that refer to reduction of staff. The first one is night crews, and again, that's a matter of attrition, not filling open positions as a part of what that would be like, which is certainly why that's a part of the tier 1. Reducing some of the summer support. Again, you'll see some of the shift to community education if there are community education specific programs that would necessitate some of that. Shifting internal mail services, that is something we have piloted this year, where that is our transition students and program that have been doing our mail services. It has worked out. I think it's been a mutual benefit to allow our students to be doing some of that work to run our mail system. Prorating nutritional and custodial, school nutrition custodial expenses. So this comes back to food services funds. For the custodial services that are necessary as a part of providing meals, making sure that that is coded to that particular fund. Again, the next step we'll talk about prorating again costs to community education, buildings and grounds expenses, as well as again fertilizer or specific buildings and grounds expense within that. Increase operating efficiencies and renegotiating contracts for services, and again that's contracts for services, not employee agreements contracts. That talks about, and that's something that the board's been aware of for a number of times. We talked about, a new garbage contract. We did, do some things with our snow removal or otherwise. This is about continuing to look at ways we can get, more efficiencies or renegotiate some of those contracts for services. The next one, pretty straightforward, adjusting the budget to match the actual usage of our middle school generator. Reducing some of the supplies. Again, this is another area where there still is a significant budget to purchase supplies. This is about, as it says in there, adjusting priorities and also finding ways to see if we can do some cooperative pricing. And I know Tim Beasley is here tonight. I think we'll talk through some potential specifics or examples if that is requested. Increase energy efficiency. I may slow down on this one because this comes up quite a bit. This came through a lot of questions about what this looks like. Can we adjust our temperatures or otherwise to enlist some savings? Rod, do you want to just talk about what that process would like?
So for the last couple of months, Tim and I have reached out to our prior districts and also have reached out to our vendors, SiteLogic. I also reached out to KA, my colleague in the prior district. This saving could be implemented and fully realized, the $45,000 here, based on the study. What's going to happen is we got to be very strict on it to make sure that it's going to be fully utilized. Meaning that if there's an empty room, custodians have to do their tours probably 2 or 3 times to make sure that the lights are off. We're going to implement programming controls within our HVAC systems here. There are ways we can be more efficient, but keep in mind, it's going to take a lot of teamwork in order to make it more efficient and realize the potential savings here. But 45,000 is a very conservative numbers because you will have had some flows throughout the day.
So again, I think just some of the examples are if you have an empty space over the course of the weekend, making sure that it's programmed, that the temperature turns down, you're not heating empty spaces or empty buildings, or utilizing things inefficiently. But again, I just wanted to point out there was some analysis that went into that number with some of the team and some of the consultants that we've been working with. Reduce elementary custodial positions, so those are 0.5 positions at each of the elementaries. And then you're also talking about the district-wide custodial position, kind of to be determined, but continue to try to find efficiencies within that department. The next list is the elementary. Again, this is another piece of the cost to provide food services. So chargeback is the way we would term that for people who are providing supervision during the lunchroom time. That could be breakfast or that could be lunch. But if you have supervision in there, that can be a part of the food services and the requirements to serve food. Reduce instructional and capital supply budgets, as well as eliminating supply allocations. So you'll notice there are some reductions in needs to find efficiencies, and they're also looking at, potentially leaning into, the generous support of PTOs as we've had in the past, if there are some specific needs. That's not a guarantee. That certainly is an ask of finding other ways to do some of those things in the coming year. The next two items, so item 4 will be eliminating elementary Spanish. And again, I'm going to actually invite one of our elementary teachers, I believe Principal Swanson is going to join us to talk this through a little bit, both for the item 4, elimination of Spanish, to talk through what that looks like about having a 4-day rotation to a 3-day rotation, as well as the specialist restructure. So yeah, you want to just, right there.
Hello, so I'm going to explain about the specialist schedule, sort of like I do at kindergarten roundup. So I can paint a picture of what specials would look like for any student at the elementary building. So we go to a 3-day rotation. Right now we're at a 4, and the Spanish is the one that is being eliminated. I'm going to hold in my fingers. Number 1, that the first day 1, an elementary student could have PE and music. It'd be 25 minutes each day, because our block is 50 minutes. So with music and PE, we have skinnies. So day 1, a student would have PE for 25 minutes and music for 25 minutes, all 3 trimesters. On day 2, you would have art or media for the full 50 minutes. You would have art for 1 trimester and media and STEM for 2 trimesters. And then back on day 3 again, you would have PE and music, both back to 25 minutes for both slots. So our PE and music schedule doesn't change. What is changing is not having Spanish, and we did pay attention to surveys and input from families, and then adding media into the rotation. Media used to be 30 minutes, 20 times a year. Now that will actually be increased to part of the rotation. Some thoughts that we put into this. Why more media than art? Well, with the media, the scope of the job has just gotten so much more intense with our innovation labs and our makerspace labs and library checkout, that it just seemed like a real need. Art, we would offer the 1 trimester. Some of those standards are integrated into Phi-Ed, such as the movement and the dance and things like that. We tried to put together a balanced program. One thing to keep in mind is that we're going from 4 sections to 3. In some grades, we'll have 4 sections, in some grades, we will have 3. In the sections or the grades that we have 4 sections, they'd be divided into the 3. There has been history of doing that in the past in this district. So it's a day 1, day 2, and day 3. PE music doesn't change. The one that changes is the art, and the media would rotate with the semesters. And we have 3 schools and 3 trimesters, so it lines up. Does that make sense? All right, thank you.
And then is it, Kuzana, Dr. Devon will come up and talk about the next couple of items, which is the basically the 2 education assistant positions, or line items, not positions.
Thank you, everyone. So we're just going to talk a little bit about ESP, which is Educational Support Professionals. And we're talking about the general education, nothing to do with special education at this point. And we will be doing a reduction over there in the areas of clerical, media assistance. And I gotta put on my glasses to see the rest of it. Just hang on a second. And the top people. So what will happen in those situations is we will just have to accommodate at all our schools to ensure those things still occur. They'll just be done differently. Hours will be reduced. We will readjust the whole thing. But somehow in there, we know we can make that reduction and make most things work. I think it'll, like Ross said earlier, it'll just be a lot of good teamwork, which I know that everyone will step up and do. Do you have any questions about that? Thank you.
Thanks to you both. So we're on to elementary item 8, That would be eliminated an assessment window. And again, this would be getting the fast bridge still in 2 times a year as an ability to measure student learning as opposed to the current 3 times a year. Increasing grade 5 class sizes at Bayview and Southview. You'll note what that tells us for an average class size. I will note that we did talk about Lake Town as a part of this as well, and looking at 5th grade. But that was an item that was quickly kind of discounted when the team looked at the totality of it, is that would have raised class sizes to, I think, 38 in grade 5. And certainly that is a number that immediately the team had said, we can't justify that. We can't support that as a team, a community, as parents, and otherwise. Item 10, increased class sizes in grade 4 across. And again, you'll see the projected items on the class size changes. I do want to point out real quick here for people whose brains might work like mine do, or mine does. If you just look at line item 9 and line item 10, you're seeing 2.0 FTE in line item 9 and 3.0 FTE in line item 10. And yet the line item 2 has a larger savings value assigned to it than line item 10. And I want to make sure people realize, as a team, when we were first starting this process, we used target numbers for all of our various positions, that if we're going to reduce FTE, this is a number you would utilize. And you don't take an average of a group, because that's not how typically, if you're going to let people go, that it works, because we know that it's usually the lower end salaries, the last people that are hired are the ones that would exit the system. So you have to use a more conservative number that's more of an average of your lower quartile than it is about an average across the board. But when we go through this process, if we receive, for example, retirements, resignations, others that are departing, or if there's a position that is very clear who that is, we call it a true-up process, where we could use the true value of some of those. So when you look at line item 9, we did have a couple of retirements, and we're able to use those actual salaries and benefits and what that would look like comparatively to some of the other ones that may have included a mix of known and unknown, or some of those numbers and averages. So I wanted to point out, as you look through some of those things, you say these numbers don't make sense. Some of them won't make sense because there's some deliberacy, whereas others, again, when you look at, for example, the teaching position, we use a 58,200 total package, all in salary and benefits, as a part of that average. And again, that's a number that Rod and Enid can certainly explain later as to how we came up with that as part of the analysis. But I want to point that out because the numbers are counterintuitive to the number of FTEs. Item 11 is something I'm going to ask Shane, I believe. Chief, is that what it was? Who did we say? I'm good. Shane. To talk a little bit about band instruction. As they're approaching, what I want to say is, when the first iteration of this plan did talk about reducing 5th grade band altogether as an offering. But as a part of the process of discussing this with the team, I do know that our administrators met with the entire band department to talk about some of these options. And what you see here is, I think, is an evolution of this particular plan that stayed here as a part of the restructuring of elementary band. And again, I can talk a little bit about what that looks like, but kind of split out into tier 1 and tier 3. And they're going to explain what that would mean. If you look at, 27,648, add those together, and you're going to come fairly close to probably a more actualized number of what that position looks like, the lower end of just south of the 58.2 that I mentioned earlier.
Just real briefly is when we met together and worked as administrators, looked at each other's reduction lists, and when 5th grade band was on there, we reached out to the band group to discuss, ask for more input from them, and share that out of the 4.5 and the 512 programs, so it's 4.5 total instrumental music FTEs, 512. And I asked different scenario wise, if you had to reduce 0.5, you have to reduce 1.0, where would you prioritize those reductions? And we had really good conversations. They strongly believe the cornerstone of the program, the success of the program, is the start in 5th grade. But there was also a want that students to be no longer pulled for band from core class, from tier 1 instruction. And so with the elimination of the ability to pull students for lessons in band in 5th grade out of core content, out of core classes, there would be a restructuring of the position, because the time that they'd be able to work with students would be limited to the 3 schools to a certain periods of the day, which would not further equate to a full-time position. It would be more of a 0.5 position. And so just sort of kind of rethinking of the philosophy of how 5th grade band works at the elementary, you're looking at a 0.5 structural philosophic reduction. But then as far as the reduction for the elementary group in saying 1.0 is on our list as far as trying to reach our target. And it remains on the list, but they would prefer that reduction to come from secondary. So looking at either the high school or middle school program to reduce frequency of lessons, to increase size of lesson groups, and work with larger class sizes. I mean, quoting them specifically, as they said, we will take larger class sizes to maintain fifth grade band. And so they said they could run the program almost as is, with some increases in or decreases in frequency lessons and some increased lesson sizes at the secondary level, and run the program almost very similar to what it is now with a 0.5. A 1.0 reduction would then just further decrease the amount of frequency in lessons and increase the size of classes. So that's how that's explained. Keep the other one to add to that.
Okay, so then item 12, elimination of a couple of the intervention ESPs. You'll notice that's a total of 11 hours worth of ESP time providing some of that support. And item 13 is increasing class sizes for grade 3 at Bayview and Southview. You'll notice kind of the corresponding options of what that will look like. I will say, just as a pause right here before we move on to the next list, these are some areas where I do believe, and we were running some of our most recent runs of what we would as a district have coming to us for compensatory money, which is additional revenues that we get based on free reduced. I don't know if we don't get a real healthy amount comparatively to other districts I've worked in, but it's measurable money. And I would say we're estimating around $200,000. So if we still want to hit our target of about 4.75 million was our tier 3 target, you'll notice that the last page, our total list right now is about 4.81, maybe almost 4.82. So you'll notice that gives about $62,000 worth of room already to say that if there's some things you want to pull off the list, we have that ability. But I would also say, if we aren't making significant changes in other areas, I do believe that, you know, speaking for the team and some conversations, I believe there's some agreement that it would be our priority to utilize about 150,000 of the $200,000 compensatory funds to pull items 13 and most of item 12, about 150,000 worth, so that would be about 27,000 of the intervention ESPs from this list, still leaving, again, $62,000 worth of room for other items that the board might want to debate. And again, that's not limiting, that's just to meet the target. You could decide you want to adjust the targets or look at other places too. And then I would also then recommend that of that 200,000, we maintain 50,000 of our compensatory revenue as an ability to look to the fall. Because as we go through this whole process, remember that visual of we start with stakeholder input and design teams to develop this plan. That's what's been going on forever. Like, it feels like forever. It's been going on for several months. Then there's decision-making time where we do have to make some decisions. And again, we yield that authority to the board. Then there's implementation and refinement when we go through and do the work. And so if the board takes action on March 27th, regardless of the outcomes, we have to start doing the work, and we have to monitor the potential impacts and unintended consequences when we get into the fall. If we have that additional compensatory revenue, we still also have that room to address needs or unintended consequences if it starts to impact our system in a way that we didn't anticipate. If we suddenly have a need for an additional section of a primary grade, which you'll also notice was prioritized through this process, as there are no recommended reductions to K1 or 2 even on the list because of that desire to prioritize. We can continue to do that with some of that room and utilize that potentially in the fall in a different way. That's our recommendation. Certainly you may have other ideas on how you might want us to do that. But I wanted to note that that is our priority, is to see if we can remove items 12 and 13 from this particular list. Jumping to the secondary budget, or the secondary adjustments, the first two line items come back to, again, food services chargebacks fund to the cost of providing food services and the cost of supervising for those. Item 3 would be reduce the pre-ACT so that it's basically just one window 10, grade 10 instead of both 9 and 10. And then also asking students, you know, there are a number of districts that do this, and Principal Sparby could speak to this because he did some of the research of students who are taking it, having them pay for the ACT. It's no longer something that is required for graduation as it was some time ago. So it is an option that students could do that. Item 4, this was actually a fairly popular item when it came down to feedback, both internally and from our survey, was reinstituting parking fees for the high school parking lot. And again, we're probably one of few in the area. Principal Sparby could talk through some of the comparables and the cost, but that still is, I believe, from his estimate, a low number comparatively to some of our neighbors in how much they charge students for the right, or I should say the privilege to park on our property. Reducing instructional budgets, and again, it's a 10% allocation of all instructional budgets. You'll see that also coming through the capital budgets or reduction. Again, those are kind of themes coming through of finding ways to be more efficient for the coming year. Also item 7 now, the media center books and postponing purchase of new books. Number 8, reducing summer allocation for the high school counselors. So again, that means some of the prioritization of tasks and potentially reallocating some of the responsibilities of scheduling to the administration. Eliminating media center ESP position and oh, what did I say?
It's not listed on my words.
Oh, thank you. So item 9 does not say, but it is the high school media center ESP position at the high school and reallocating those responsibilities to the learning lab ESP. Middle school and high school security positions. Right now, the middle school position is vacant. The high school position is not. So that would be again a reduction of that particular individual. Right side staffing for the learning center. There have been some things, and I appreciate Dr. Schoenweis and for working with Tim and the team at the WLC. We did have fewer students than was originally programmed for. So they try to do some creative things to move staff to support in-house subs or transfer things over to the high school. So again, this is a matter of now in the future planning for that reduced enrollment. Middle school ESP media center is a reduction of 0.5. Eliminate work experience overloads. And again, that comes from our special education department that believes we can fit that within existing staffing as opposed to some of the overloads that have been used as a part of that. Eliminate a part-time math support ESP at the middle school. Again, the middle school reduction, as well as reduce the technology support ESP at the middle school. And again, I'm powering through these, but certainly Shane is going to join us here in just a minute, actually right now, to talk about the middle school restructure. This is one of the more complicated items to try to describe, and I think he is probably the best person to do that. But certainly if he wants to offer any feedback of those other positions, you're certainly welcome, but not required to at this point.
All right, I'll try to simplify a very complicated change here. When I came to this district 13 years ago, there was a schedule that I inherited as a leader that embraced the middle school philosophy of teaming and collaborative planning time built within a day. And that model provides core teachers with an additional time to work together during the day to team and collaborate on curriculum, working with parents, getting to know students, working with counselors. It's all a relationship-based directive, kind of like a middle school model directive. That was adopted by a lot of schools when it initially came out. As I look at research right now, and we looked at 14 different schools and their schedules in the surrounding area, we're the last, along with Newburgh, as far as that's offering that paid time during the day for additional collaborative planning, for the most part, at least on a daily practice. And so some of the reason that it hasn't been able to continue is because it's just not financially funded. The cost to run that, as you can see, is $400,000 to $500,000 additional in staffing per year. And so there's a really big investment in teachers having that opportunity to collaborate together and work together to provide the best program for kids. But again, it's hard to maintain that when it's underfunded or not funded at the MD level to run that type of model. And so moving away from that, if you think about it, all of our core teachers, which includes math, language arts, science, and social studies, they all had an additional 45 minutes in their day for collaborative planning, and we would be eliminating that in this new structure. And so you would take those 45 minutes the district's already paying, and you would start to then assign them instructional time to students, is the biggest change. And so with that comes a whole restructuring of what the day looks like. And you can see that the restructure right here results in a reduction of 7 teaching positions, which is reallocation of some of those core teachers into instructional periods. And it's also reducing the number of exploratory offerings we have in our day. Our current model has full year math and full year language arts. Then it has a half year of science and a half year of social studies, but we run extended periods. which when I got here were like 75 minutes. With the addition of an advisory period, it's been whittled down to about 64s, but longer than your standard 50s or 52s or 45s that most schools are running right now. So that's how we were able to still be able to run half your science, half your social, but still there was a definite deficiency in the amount of science and social studies that students were receiving throughout all 3 years. The new model runs 4 cores. It runs actually a 6-period day, which is currently what we run right now with advisory. In our old model or our current model right now, the periods were variable in length. So core classes were roughly 64s and the exploratory encore classes were 45s. And so a core teacher would teach 3 cores. They would teach 1 encore. They'd have a collaborative prep time, individual prep time, and then advisory. In the new model, which we're still working on exactly what, I mean, the schedule will be a 6+1, which is 6 periods plus advisory, but where everything fits, we're still kind of working on. But in that, a core teacher would teach 5 periods of the day out of 6. And the class lengths would be equal throughout. They'd be all 52s. And so there would also be a common amount of instructional time between the encore teachers and the core teachers, where before there was a discrepancy between the two, that they'd be teaching the same amount of minutes. With the reduction in 1 exploratory class, with going to full year science, full year social, and then full year math, full year language arts, you only have 2 periods left, where before we had 3. And so with that, there had to be some reduction in programming. And as you can see, there was a proposal to reduce world language offerings in 6th and 7th grade, reduce French overall throughout 6, 7, 8, but maintain a Spanish offering in 8th grade that still accomplishes a similar amount of time than our current Spanish offerings in 7th and 8th offer. But it would discontinue that as an option. And it does change some of our Phi-Ed offerings, and it'll adjust some of our health offerings as well. Some of this proposed schedule change that is impactful is returning to trimesters instead of the middle school being on quarters. And so that we would more closely mimic the rest of the schools, but especially the high school, so that we can better and more efficiently potentially share teachers. So having similar class periods, similar length, and then being on trimesters, all those things more closely align with the ability to share teachers as needed. Because we know that often when we staff, if you have less than full-time FTEs, you don't keep them. They turn over each year. And the more you can share staff and have full-time positions, the greater you can continue to invest in them when they stay. You know, and so this gives us greater opportunity to partner with the high school and sharing staff. But I listed here kind of what the restructuring, kind of the general overview of what would continue, what would stay. And then there's below that, there's also the class size reduction. And so the restructure is one separate that is, listed as 7 FTEs, and then the class size, upping the class sizes is an additional 5 FTEs for a total of 12. With that, what questions might you have?
With the class size adjustments, say increase, can I just
Yeah.
real quick? So I know one of the questions is it's difficult to compare what it looks like for class sizes and FTEs between elementary and middle school and high school. Elementary, a lot of times it takes the number of first graders in divided by the number of teachers Y, and there's your class size. Whereas when there's registration, elective offerings, or other kinds of choice, it's not quite as simple. And so what you'll see here is a different way of presenting that, which talks about licensed teacher to student ratios and increases. But I'm going to ask, just as again, I know people are going to be asking, so what does that practically mean? As best we can, knowing that there is some variance into what that looks like at the secondary, how does that practically impact class sizes? So I'll ask maybe Shane to address that question when it comes down to middle school, and I'll ask Principal Sparby to join us to talk about what that looks like for the next item when it comes down to high school.
So previous to this year, the target to be in classroom seats in middle school is 28. Looking into next year, the target is to move up to 30 in our sections. Some of that, some of that will come in our core sections. And so, for example, number of students in 5th grade right now is 313. In past experience, I would staff that in 11 core sections. This coming year, because I'll move that up closer to 30, they'll be in 10. And that'll be how it works in both 6th, 7th, and 8th. So in like the incoming 6th graders, if they were to come in right now without any additions or leaves, your average class size in 6th grade would be at 31.3. Your average class in 7th grade would be at 30.9, and your average class in 8th grade would be at 30.5. Now that is mainly for your core classes in science and social studies, because there are students that are pulled out typically for language arts instruction, for special education needs, for math and language arts instruction. That averages usually about 14 to 20 students per ELA or math. So those numbers, when you pull out those 14 to 20, your numbers for math and ELA are actually all below 30. They're all 29 to 30. And so your higher class sizes would potentially be in your science and social, which all students do take. The change in model also allows right now our encore teachers, say you have a 7th, 8th grade teacher that teaches 3 sections of 7th grade, 3 sections of 8 in a day. And so they are hired right now in a 12 section model. We have 12 sections in 7 and they have 12 and 8. This model allows us to reduce the 12 sections and better utilize them. So they currently do have some classes that are at, say, 30, but they also have some classes at 20, just how some needs and classes align at the middle school. And so what this does is it allows us to not run those, like have those FTEs in 12 sections. We can more efficiently use those FTEs with more flexibility in the schedule to have a common schedule throughout the day and be able to schedule them at different locations at times throughout trimesters. Allows a lot more flexibility and efficiency. So that's the numbers. There were some other numbers I think that people would like to be aware of too, is the amount of student contact. And in our current schedule, a core teacher will have 3 core classes of encore and advisory. If you take the advisory out, which our advisory is running from 18 to 22 students currently, a core teacher on average would see about 112 students, mostly for the year. And our encore teachers would see 168 students per quarter. So they would end up seeing the whole grade level in 7th and 8th, but they were instructionally connected to students during a quarter of 168 students. In the new model, or in the new proposed schedule, core teachers would have 150 students, mostly for the year, which is an increase from 112 to 150 of student connections or student instructional points. And the encore teachers would actually drop to 150. So the encore, there would be a better balance between the number of instructional contact students, but there would be an increase for core teachers as they'd be teaching 5 sections instead of currently 4. And those sections would be up to that 30 number. So that's where you're getting that 150 contact points without the advisory in consideration. Any questions on that?
Actually, this on row 17. Is this grouping, is this a take it or leave it, or is this configurable? I'll just be very candid, like I see the whole point of reducing instructional minutes in math, and I cringe at that. Is it a case where you can come to you and say, I don't like any of the others, but I can live with it, but I don't like that. Do you get my question here?
Yep. Right now, the current schedule made a greater investment in math and language arts at the expense of social studies and science. And so I would say you're eliminating direct math instruction, but you're also potentially gaining some of that in science classes. So I wouldn't say it's fully, there is a reduction. There is a reduction in what is currently offered in language arts and social, or language arts and math, but that's at the expense of science and social studies. So this is saying we're going to run a 4 core period day with equal amounts. And statistically across the 14 schools we look at, we're unique in the fact that we offer the way that we offer it, with a half-year offering of science and social.
So this, I want to paraphrase what you said, just to make sure that I heard is what you said. This would bring it into balance between the different subjects.
Fully.
Okay.
Yep, there would be an equal amount of math, language arts, social studies, and science, which right now it's very different.
I'm sorry, just a quick follow-up to that. So the 17% reduction that you're talking about is just from 64 minutes to 52 minutes. So you're talking about 12 minutes of
not necessarily instruction time, but 12 minutes in the classroom, because the instruction time might not necessarily be 64 minutes long of instruction time.
Correct. It would be 12 minutes of reduction of seat time in a classroom.
Okay. Thank you.
It would not reduce the responsibility to reach the standards for each grade level.
Explain the practical implications, class size, impact that you would see for reducing the FTEs and line item 19.
Sure. So at the high school level, this is kind of a process we go through every year. Last year, for some of you that were on the board last year, recall I asked for some overloads to help offset some class sizes that we had. And last year, we were, with our core courses, we were in that 28 to 30. The request for the overloads was to keep it at 28 to 30 and under that 30 number. This right now is going to put us more in that 32 number. What's a little bit confusing or difficult is at the high school level, registration isn't an exact science. So I can look at the course, I can see how many students are registered for it, and I can tell you what the average is. But if my average is 32, I'm going to get some of those classes that just do the scheduling are going to be 27 and 28, and some are going to be 35. It's just the way the schedule works. So when we look at scheduling, we really try to get a balance on what our core courses are going to be, because being they're the core, every student needs to take them. So they're going to be built into their schedule somewhere. Also with that, you can factor in what the course is that you're offering. Obviously, doing a 9th grade algebra course, you would not want to run that number as high as you would if you were doing an AP calculus for obvious reasons. You're dealing with juniors and seniors in an advanced placement course versus 9th graders. So with our cores, we try to run those. They're going to be right around that 32 number. This year is what I'm looking at for all of our sectioning. Our elective offerings, we can run those at higher sections. And the reason being, as a student registers, like I said, the cores are going to be in their schedule built in. Their electives, they pick their electives, but they also pick their alternates. So as the schedule gets built out, they might not get the elective that they signed up for just because of a conflict with a core course that they have to be in. So I can typically run those a little bit higher numbers, knowing that once we run the schedule and conflicts, those numbers are going to come down. And again, you have to look at what the elective course you're offering is, that you're offering, because if you're doing a foods course or a ceramics course, you're kind of limited on your numbers there, just based on space and abilities for labs. I know some concerns have come up that we're going to be running classes over 40. We're not going to be running any classes over 40 that don't already run over 40, such as a band, choir, some of our BE classes get over 40. I don't see any of our core courses hitting that number. We're going to have some in that mid to 35 to 37 number. But for a lot of our core courses, you physically can't get 40 kids in the classroom. So if that came to fruition, we would have to make some adjustments. The other thing that we try to factor in that is a variable that's not an exact science is PSEO students. And, we've looked at trends over the years. So we know that, this course, the kids have to register for this course, but then when they choose to go PSEO, what courses they typically come from. So we can kind of look at trends, and I can run those sections at higher numbers, knowing that over the years, that's typically where we've lost students that have gone the PSEO route. And again, back to, it's not an exact science, so if those things don't come to fruition, that's when we get into August, we say we have to make some adjustments in how this works, because we can't, I budgeted for this, but it didn't turn out what I thought, so now I said I have 42 in section, I can't do that. So how do we make those adjustments?
Thanks to you both. Maybe I'll come back if there's additional questions after we kind of go through. We have one more section to get through, that is our athletics and activities adjustments. The first couple are really more about placement. I think one of the things I would say is when you work with the team in these different groups, different categoricals, and you go through hundreds and hundreds of line items. Sometimes you just find things that just didn't really make sense when they were replaced. And that's part of the first couple edible classroom is budget cleanup for, some of the yearbook and athletic consulting fees budgets. Item 3 would be shifting middle school programming to community education. That would be within middle school track and field, as well as the spring musical. You'll also notice a resulting reduction in the activities and attendance clerk and ESP at the middle school. There have been some past middle school programs that have been shifted and run and facilitated by community education, therefore it becomes self-sustaining underneath the community ed. So again, just a couple more programs that would be added to that portfolio as well, if you will. One of the popular things that came through, again, feedback from the public, was a matter of wanting to limit the number of athletics and activities offerings for students, but potentially increasing fees to participate to help offset some of the costs within those. So you're going to see a number of spaces here where we've gone through and done some things with recommending fee adjustments. I would also say, as you have questions or others, I know that our activities director, Jill Johnson, has done a great job gathering some data from comparable districts, so you can see how some of these things do compare and still puts us very much in line with other districts and other schools. So you'll see again, established fees for club participation in the middle school, fees for middle school ensembles, some supply reduction, the next couple of line items, 6 and 7, again, that's part of that theme of trying to be more efficient with the utilization of some of our budgets. Again, fee for participation in cross-country, fee for off-season strength and conditioning programs, so it'll be $50 per off-season as a part of that. And again, the team can talk a little bit about the math and what goes into that, or what does that mean for our student athletes. Limiting state tournament housing and meals and trying to find other ways to offset that, potentially fundraising or boosters for those teams that make those and have those experiences. Eliminating Science Club and Knowledge Bowl, I'd point out, that's a part of this list, but part of this list because of lack of participation, more so than budget. And I do think there's certainly willingness to look at some of these things, that if we're suggesting participation isn't there and suddenly there's an increase in participation and student paying fees for activities that offset that, certainly this is more here because of that participation than it is about saying, let's eliminate a program. The team worked really hard within this to not eliminate programs and opportunities for kids. Now, I'm not saying throughout the totality of this plan that there aren't some things that didn't come down, but there, hopefully throughout this, you see those opportunities in this section for our students to engage in areas of their, passion and things that they really get excited about, continue forward, albeit sometimes in a more efficient model or with some additional fees to help offset the costs of running those programs. The next one then is a whole high school increase of participation fees. Again, that was a big theme. And again, I won't go through all of those, but you'll notice what those shifts are. And certainly Jill Johnson can talk about some of the comparables within some of those as well. Item 13, increased price of the yearbook, $4 a book for middle school and $15 to help offset the cost of the advisor for those programs. 14 would be delaying uniform purchases for a year. So again, utilizing what we have right now for the coming year. And all of section 15, you'll notice a series of reduction of assistant coaching positions. And you notice again, some of that is based on the comparables and the fact that there are, ratios comparatively to other districts as to how many coaches they have per participant or within programs. And again, the majority of these does keep us within line of some of those competitors and how many coaches they have for various programs. Athletic equipment budget reduction and athletic team entry fees. Again, those come down to find ways to be more efficient within those. The last page there does come up with the totals. And again, as I mentioned before, you'll notice some areas come in above and below some of those totals. You'll notice there was a real priority within some of our elementary programming. Those were below target and by design. And again, continuing to say we would bring that within the recommendation of the team, even more so to be utilizing some of the compensatory money for those bottom line items within the elementary, if it kind of goes through that path. I think before I turn it over to the board, just kind of some general closing comments here. I knew coming into the position that we had a process we needed to do, and we have been statutory debt since 2018, quite a while. With, when you look at it, minimal progress comparatively to where we are right now, -5 million, and where we believe we're on track to -6.2, puts us within about $200,000 of kind of a low budget that we've had. And I appreciate my conversations within the community, within our staff, have said people acknowledge we need to do something. we need to interrupt this pattern. And, you know, I would say, obviously, this is not a real exciting plan to be a part of. Yes, I knew there was going to be some need to do some budget things, but certainly the gravity and the magnitude of this was far surpassing what I expected, probably what you expected, and what the community expected. But again, we've put together a plan that, while this is difficult and makes for a difficult spring and makes for a difficult process that we're going through right now, I do believe our team sees this as manageable, or we wouldn't be recommending this. And again, I think there's an understanding that we need to interrupt the path that we've been on and make some significant progress. While tonight is difficult, the future of our district is extremely bright. We have amazing families, we have an amazing staff and team that will help us make sure that we continue to provide high quality educational experiences. And on the other side of correcting this is an incredible opportunity to make sure that we're investing in our highest priorities based on what we realize we need as a community and an educational system versus necessarily what we have right now. And I want to make sure we focus on that opportunity that comes with the difficult decisions that we have to make, and I'm hoping that we can come together as a community to make. It is an opportunity that we're going to have some discussion, some debate, and to talk about the merits of some of these ideas. And I think that's healthy, but I also think there are things that we need to do as a system to make sure that we are responsible for the long term by doing some of these things that hopefully would be short term that allow us to revisit priorities in the years to come. I do, again, say that I'm not excited about this, but I do want to thank our administrative team, both who's here tonight, as well as the people who've been a part of this process throughout. It has been challenging. We've had challenging conversations, and I have pushed people sometimes directly to say we need to continue to do this work and to make some difficult decisions. And they've stuck through it, and I appreciate that commitment. I appreciate the people who weighed in and given us ideas. And again, I'm really proud of our school district, and I know that we can weather through this together and make sure that we have a quality educational system for many years to come. And I still hold firm, we are going to be one of the best districts in the state of Minnesota for many years to come. And I do believe this is something that long-term can be beneficial, knowing that this is not exciting and this is very painful to do right now. I will at this point turn it over to you, Chair Geller, to determine kind of next steps. I know what we really would like to front load is an opportunity to ask questions to make sure we front load our process with making sure we really understand, ask questions about the different items, and then I'll defer to you as to how you may want to go next steps of feedback or otherwise, or what that time looks like.
Thank you very much. I also just want to reiterate on, probably on behalf of the entire board, the amount of work that went into this plan that we know the superintendent and the finance director and the whole entire administrative team put into bringing this tonight. And again, reiterate that we know that this is very difficult work, and we know that it's not somewhere we really want to be, but we also know the necessity of the work, the necessary situation that we're in order to move forward in a really positive way. So I think for tonight, for the board members, what we really want to do is just get any questions out that would need further explanation as to what some of the line items are. So if anything, when we were going through all of these adjustments, is there anything in any of them that we would like more information on as far as what it impacts or any of those things? So maybe we should start off with that first section, the administration budget adjustments for 23-24. Are there any questions that board members would like to ask at this point? Just points of clarification or points of anything from the administrative one? I guess maybe I'll ask one then. If no one else is gonna have any right now. The number 2 there, I know that that has to do with reducing the school board travel, public relations postage. Can you maybe just go over what drove costs in that category? Like what in the past year or 2 years or whatever led to that amount? Do you have that out? I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be.
So when we went through this process, we started analyzing line item by line item, and we started doing some drill downs. We noticed there was some conferences that was attended. We also noticed items that was charged back to the actual program, which is the school board. So it was items such as what it is now, to travel. There were some gifts as well that was charged there. If you want more detail, I can actually get that for you. But from a high level, that's what went into that program code.
That item being reduced to 0 or? what's the,
Well, yeah, like, I mean, was that an actual, I guess, was that a?
Yes, that was an
Okay, it was an actual.
But is there, to that question, this isn't, so
Yeah.
when we go through the plan, we try to be really deliberate with the use of language. To reduce would imply something's left over, whether it's a position, an FTE, or a budget. It means there is something there still to do some of those things. So it's not suggesting there would be no travel or professional development or otherwise, versus the word eliminate would mean take it down to 0. So between those, so yes, there would be some reduction. I think you could probably pull up what the total existing budgets are.
just-
So, all right, number 11, I know the recommendation there is to eliminate that 2.0 FTE of the teaching and learning managers. Do you have any knowledge of what kind of teacher support would be eliminated in that situation?
So teacher support, as far as within those positions, basically everything gets consolidated into those other items. I could certainly ask Dr. Schoenweiss to explain a little bit about the peer evaluation model that needs to be a part of that, because that's actually done quite a bit by our teaching and learning instructional coaches, excuse me, within that. Basically, everything does have to be consolidated within the responsibilities of the Director of Educational Services, the TOSA position, as well as the positions that are within the support of the deans. And so it is about basically prioritizing what has to get done, what those supports look like. So the current supports would be provided by the teaching and learning specialist for the elementary, and then some of that within the role of the deans that would continue for the next year.
So in effect, it's a shift of, the actual support going to those programs just shifts, the responsibility shifts to different positions. Is that? Okay.
Yep.
Staying on 11, note 2 there, those ESSERS funds, they run out in 23, 24.
Yes.
I also had a question on 11.
Yep.
Well, I noticed that those were tier 2 items. So just a little clarification on like, why did we decide maybe those weren't our tier 1s? Like what implications do you envision that happening that put them into tier 2?
Yeah, I mean, the recommendation is going to be to do all 3 tiers comparatively to the others. I think what you look at is the level of intrusion of those positions and the supports that they're currently offering, kind of working backwards. So because, for example, you're talking about a new peer evaluation model as a part of that, that is fairly intrusive and involved, that is going to take some additional work. So that, I think, differentiates that from some of the tier 1 items, which don't quite have that same level of intrusion, as well as just within the priorities of the system. So I think that's where that is acknowledged as, that's a high level change comparatively to some of the tier 1, which, as I say that, it makes it sound like it's disrespectful that the items in tier 1, it isn't meant to be, but that is a part of the process of trying to tier these things out to say, if we were going to recommend to the board the things we would want to slow down and take a look at, that would be a part of that, is all those changing models and all those moving pieces. Can I just have, so we did get a question that kind of goes through a number of different questions, and the first time it's kind of mentioned is on this one, which is kind of the totality. So I know that some people have noted that there's a lot of different line items that talk about shifting things to community education or shifting things to fund to food services. And so Rod did kind of pull some data to answer, I think, that question about the totality of the things that are coming under that umbrella and the ability to sustain that within it. So I'll maybe have Rod, if there's additional need for clarification, I can ask Stephen Jensen, who's our Director of Community Education, to join us as well.
So we took a robust look at the last 5 years. When we first came on board, we noticed there was underutilization for Fund 2 and Fund 4, which is our community ed fund. For ending the fiscal year 21-22, what we did is we fully utilized efficient chargebacks of around $200K to food service. That helped alleviate the general fund. This year during the budget process, as we were reviewing line items, we noticed within our processes that we have not charged back services from Fund 1 to Fund 4. So in totality, there's $118,000 that will be charged back to Fund 4. In totality, it's 15.8% of a $761,000 fund balance. Can this be sustainable? We strongly feel it will be sustainable, given that from fiscal year 21-22, there was a ending fund balance in Fund 4 of $395K. It grew 355K to $751,000. As far as Fund 2, did extra homework on this. So it's $237,000 for Fund 2. In totality, Fund 2, the food service fund, has over $3 million right now in fund balance. So our chargeback targets are 7.5% in totality. This will help alleviate the general fund as well for Fund 2. Can this be sustainable? We're also strategic and forward thinking, knowing that if legislature pass free meals for all, it could be the next cross subsidy. So we're well aware of that. So we don't want to charge back too much to Fund 2.
And Stephen, do you want to, just talking, some of the sustainability and some of the things that you're doing to come in and look for efficiencies or other things?
Thank you. So when it comes to, I've been here 5 weeks and just learning everything that's going on. But, one thing I just did immediately was digging into the budget and knowing what's going on and also what we're doing and how we're operating. There are some inefficiencies that are happening that we're going to be able to gain time back, in which we'll be able to implement some of the more things that are coming our way. And like Ross said, my predecessor did a great job with our budget. And so sustainably, I think that, we can take on a couple more things here and there. And also with the work of the team here, just making sure that we have teamwork going on and still utilizing the same staff that we may have. It just may look a little bit different in how we operate.
Thanks. Any other questions on 11? I have one quick question on 12. That moratorium, is that something that then the board needs or we need to be taking into consideration during contract negotiations this session?
I mean, you certainly could, if you wanted to look at that and say that that's something you'd want to negotiate or otherwise take away. Otherwise, right now, again, that is just the discretion of the superintendent as to, it doesn't have to, it's not binary, it's not 3 or 0. It can be anything up to 3%. So you could, if you wanted to. I'm not saying necessarily that you should or advocating one way or the other, just that is certainly within the ability of the board to look at that.
Thank you. Any other questions on the administration budget adjustments recommendations? All right, then let's look at the second category, which was the instructional. Instructional and people support budget adjustments. Questions about clarification or impacts?
This is basic. I'm row 1, adjustments from budget to actual costs. That's understandable.
Sorry. Item 1 on the instruction people support. It's the infrastructure and software.
We have a number.
Do you want to join us?
Yeah, sure. There's a number of infrastructure pieces that number of infrastructure pieces that we're trying to reduce costs and looking at different ways to do that. And the first example here is what we use to manage all our Apple devices. And so currently we use a software that is that we can reduce and use a different software for about half the cost. And try to be more efficient with that and be able to still do the same things that we are currently doing with those devices. We're also required to have a web filter to filter all the internet traffic, and we're looking to reduce the cost of the current filter that we're using, and also replacing or getting rid of a particular resource that we've used, which is called GoGuardian, and it's a classroom management tool that teachers have had available to them to help manage devices when kids are in the classroom using devices. It also has a portion of that software gives parents an opportunity to monitor student traffic and things like that from their own mobile device. So we are looking to eliminate that, but look at it and be able to have those tools in different ways. And so we're reducing the cost. And for a web filter, there's some opportunity, a new web filter, there are opportunities to do some of those same things. And so trying to find ways to, again, become more efficient and try to utilize the same tools that we've had in the past, but just at a cheaper rate and more efficient. So those are mainly what those infrastructure things are.
Budget cost to actual, it's just a question about what that means. Meeting is the last line.
That's adjustments.
Oh, adjustments. So there was one of the items that when Bob mentioned that we were going through line item by line item, there was a line item that was listed, and it was for internet service provider, and it was an amount that has never been used. That particular line item, and so we were able to remove that $16,500 that was always budgeted, but nobody, and it was a line item that we never used there, and so we moved that part and made it more actual.
Okay, other questions?
And Ra, you're gonna beat me again, sorry. On number 3, it talks about a delay of the replacement of the WHS Business Education Computer Lab. But I noticed a pattern as we went through that there's a few different places where we have, oh, we're gonna do a 1-year delay, or we're gonna do a 1-year deferment, or like this one. I was wondering if, of course you can't do it right now, if you could give us the number of how much is gonna come back online next year. Because obviously most of our cuts here are going to happen again in the next cycle, but the stuff that has to come back online, we need to know that because we still have not paid off all the debt in the year. So.
Thank you, Jesse. Part of our strategy is reviewing our actual deferred maintenance, long-term planning, and also construction costs and capital. Part of the reason why we're in the situation that we're in is because of overspent in capital. So what we want to do is hold the line for 1 year with our deferred construction costs, capital costs. I mean, just deferred maintenance, and then have a 10-year plan working with SiteLogic, a vendor that we are potentially going to bring in, develop that, and look at the data within their system, because SiteLogic has a robust ERP that I can go into, Tim can go into, Brian can go into, and look at what is priority, what needs to be, and then plan that out. Instead of being reactive, we're going to be proactive and making sure that we're spending the dollars on the general fund for necessary projects that are going to be encompassing in the next 2 years.
So whether it comes to technology, facilities maintenance, or anything, we would certainly hope a year from now, we have a lot of data that would help support building out that plan over the course of what are our priorities in the next 10 years, realizing you build into those plans enough flexibility so that life happens moments and something didn't get to its life expectancy or beforehand, we start to adjust those projects simply by looking at the totality of them.
With the way things
technology is now, I mean, is there really a threat there? I mean, I don't know how old the equipment is we've got. Most data, most applications are cloud-based now. I mean, we are probably in not a bad position, but we can go a year or two with the equipment we've got.
Jeff, you wanna handle that one? You're probably the best versed to.
There isn't an easy answer to that because there's a lot of things, it's a tremendous amount of infrastructure. So we'd have to really start to look at the whole picture and I'd be able to tell you, yeah, we're really good here, we're not so good here, and we're not good here. And so we'd have to really go through all of that. Specifically, if you talk about this particular lab that's on the list, we can buy here. That is not an issue at all. We can do that, and we have done that in the past, where something comes up and at the end of its life, and having to look at capital expenses and so on and so forth, and we've pushed things off and know that we're gonna have to catch up in the future, and we've done that on a somewhat regular basis. And so that, for that particular item, not a big deal. What Rod's talking about as far as going through and creating a tender plan has to be done. There are some really large ticket items that have to be taken care of in the infrastructure in the next few years. And so without question, that is really, really important.
All right, other questions?
So I was wondering, line 5, where it talks about the ESP district-wide unfilled positions. I know that's noted like within the other sections as well. Can you talk a little bit about that, if it's totally separate? And then how many were left unfilled? And then how does that relate to each of the buildings?
I'll let our director of special education company kind of address that for this one. The one thing I would say I want to point out is these are sped, and some of the other EA positions or ESP positions, the ones that Dr. Devon talked about as well, that are non-sped. But you can talk specifically because this is where that comes up as I think a part of your question.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, those are two different groups we're talking about there with Dr. Devon. The 4 positions that we had budgeted for, we kind of have floated between 3 and 4 unfilled all year across the district. Generally, the last handful of ESPs in special ed is a little bit of whack-a-mole of this student is here and then the student moves and now we need one here. So it is a little bit hard to say this is the building impact. And that's the reason it is in the district-wide instructional, and you won't see these special ed paraprofessionals put in Lake Town or Southview, for example, because we may have an opening over here, and then we might move somebody because of circumstances. So it felt like it belonged in this category. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I was just wondering, if, like, is that something that is required of us? For anyone, or there must be flexibility, I guess, be there.
Yes, absolutely. Confident that going through this year and then going forward, knowing students who are with us now, who are leaving the system, switching buildings, yes, that we can meet the needs with our current level.
Which does not mean that if a new family or student moves in and they have an IEP that calls for paraprofessional support, that we wouldn't have to, we would put that back in place because we're going to meet the needs of the IEP. So in other words, circumstances would certainly change if there's another, but this is based on who we know we have right now and what we can plan for, our best ability to say, yes, we can not hire those positions and meet the needs of all of our existing students.
Thank you. Other questions in this category? All right, let's move on to that third one then, the operations and maintenance budget adjustments. Questions from the board?
It seems like a lot of custodial cuts. Do they feel it's manageable?
So Tim Bezick, our Director of Buildings and Grounds, I think is best to field that question.
Yes, we do. The two full-time positions right now have been open for quite some time for the whole school year, and then the half reductions at the elementary schools. We actually partnered with a company that they call it CPAP, where they look at square footage and workloads to balance that, and we would be right in the middle of what they recommend.
Is also, again, with items like this, I hear confidence that we can do this. When we talk about implementation and refinement, we need to take care of our buildings. We need to make sure that they look in a way that we're all continue to be proud of. If something happens within that, then you'd expect that we would be coming forward and saying, we have some unintended consequences. We need to relook at this. But again, I hear confidence, but I just use that as an opportunity to say, a lot of things that we decide are things that we can certainly adjust as information comes forward that suggests there's unintended consequences of the decisions that were made.
Thank you. Other questions on the operations and maintenance budget?
Sorry, I lost my voice. Line item 9, that's a pretty substantial number. I think that this is an item that we can sustainably save this much, or does this say get down to bare bones?
When we went through the actual analysis and looked at the line, we actually drilled down to actually the supply level and actual contract pricing level as well. It's hard to say, but we're pretty confident that we can sustain this, given that we have been underutilizing contract pricing with the actual co-ops. The roofing projects, for example, could we defer? Again, it can have a major storm that can happen, right? Anything can happen, but from the looks of it right now, working with SiteLogic and Tim, we're pretty confident.
I think we hopefully can, especially once we get the 10-year plan put in place and we start prioritizing that moving forward, I think we'll be able to do that.
I appreciate that. I was a similar line of thinking what Jesse was mentioning earlier. I can look to see if it's just deferring the expense.
It's getting that plan put in place and then looking at that usually too.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions on operations and maintenance budget? All right, let's move on to the elementary budget adjustments. Questions there?
My question is related to 9 and 10, increased class sizes, grade 5 and 4. I was just curious as to just it's not in tier 2 or tier 3. So I'm just wondering where I think secondary middle school, they did put it in the higher tier as far as something that should be really considered. What was the thought process behind there? It just seeing the higher, kid to ratio count is high.
Oh,
I mean, we're lower in the elementary.
Yeah.
Kind of where we're at.
I mean, so part of it, when I was talking about tearing those things out, as you mentioned before, there were, elementary was underneath the original target. So there are more things that ended up in tier 1. The other thing I'd mention is when you look at the tiering out of the middle school and the high school, that was basically just gradually, increasing the number of reductions. If you notice, the majority of our tier 3 and even a lot of our tier 2, those are positions. So a lot of this is also trying to prioritize jobs that people have and positions are amongst our highest priorities. So when you go backwards and look at what are those things at the bottom of most of those lists, whether it's on the custodial maintenance or any of them, it is positions. And so I think part of this is just a matter of the resulting class sizes for those were more palatable than the resulting class sizes and some of the impact of the other items that were higher on the list. And then certainly the restructure of item 11 for the 5th grade band came as a result of some of that discussion and meeting that actually split things out between tiers 1 and 3 based on the impact towards the secondary, if that makes sense. Is there anything else you need to know about class size?
I just think also, when you're looking at the elementary level, you're talking about a 4-section or a 3-section school. So if you reduce a section without displacing numerous numbers of kids, take a number and divide by 4 or divide by 3, and it changes a lot. Whereas when you're looking at the middle school, high school level, and you're dividing by 11 or 12, you could reduce a section and it changes by 2. You know, I think that's where you see 24 into 31.6 and 27 into 30.8. Why they are higher, it may result in some students needing to be adjusted so that the number 31.6 is an average. You know, it might be 33 at one school where a few students are needing to be adjusted to be able to balance out and be closer.
Other questions?
It's a similar question for both the elementary and the secondary budgets. In this case, it's line items 2 and 3, where we are already asking teachers to do a lot of the out-of-pocket expenses for their classrooms. Is this something that's going to increase that burden on them?
I just don't, that's the level, I'm unaware of what teachers are purchasing out of their own pockets. I do know we have a variety of avenues, when there's wants or needs for a classroom, beyond instructional capital. We also have PTO grants, and we also have a variety of other methods. But if there are situations where teachers are feeling they need to purchase out of pockets, I would hope they're asking administration first of where budgets could take place, because I haven't directed a teacher to go take it out of the pocket. But I may be unaware if they're doing that.
I mean, I think there's definitely things that are purchased. And I think it kind of comes down to talking about the needs versus wants, right? Like what is an absolute need and what is something that would be really nice for my classroom, but I don't have a budget for that. But I would echo asking. There hasn't been a lot of things in my 3 years at Lake Town that I've had to say no to, between our instructional budgets as well as the generous support of our PTO in ways that they can help out.
That was a good question. It brought one another one to mind here, because this line item appears to be 2 separate items within one. Yeah, line item 2, it says that reduce elementary instruction, supply budgets by 20%. The other part is about capital. How does that break out that 74,000?
Just try to pull the source document, see if we have that.
Circle back.
That might be one just to jot down and run the numbers so that we're not guessing, because even in our source document was already clustered. I got it. What do you do?
Yeah, so from a standpoint of like, each elementary school would be around 15,000 instructional, would be the percentage or the total dollar amount, and then it'd be between 9,000 and 10,000 in capital. Those are done by student populations. There's a little variation.
So just people understand, like, as I mentioned before, we went through hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of lines of things. So there is some clustering that does sometimes need to be dissected, depending on which part of the process those have been clustered one place. So if there are some things we just can't pull apart right now this evening, we can certainly grab those and make sure they're shared at the future discussion or otherwise with the board and the public.
We could presumably, this is hypothetical, but we could presumably come to you and say, you know, we're fine with the capital improvement budgets being reduced, but not the supply.
So again, as we go through this and present this to the board, you can accept it in its totality. You can reject it and say we have to completely come up with a new one, or you can modify it, which includes within line items. That is your authority and decision-making to have us do that to pull some of these things apart. So absolutely, I want to make sure that it's clear. While we've tiered things out, when we're presenting you things that are clustered together, you have the ultimate ability to give us some direction as to which items, line items you want off the list, where you want us to do additional things, or to your point, can you specifically get into the details of various pieces? Absolutely.
Other questions? I have a quick one, and maybe it's just for the elementary principals. I know that when talking about the change, so I'm talking about number 5, the 3-day rotation versus 4-day rotation. Just doing some quick math on that. Does that mean that we actually gain time in FIAD and music for students?
So what that means is, FIDA and music delivery would be the same. It'd be 120 days, but because there's skinnies, it's really an equivalent to 61 days. Art would be the one that would take the larger hit from 42 days, proposed is to 20 days. And those are at 50 minutes. And then media STEM, there to actually be a gain. So the current is 20 days, and that was a 30-minute slot pulled out of the rotation. Now it would be 40 days with 50 minutes. So that one would increase. And we would gain the instructional time also because we're putting it into the rotation. Versus now it's out of the rotation.
Any questions? All right, we will move on to the secondary budget adjustment proposal. Questions?
Thank you, Justin, sharing. My question is, on line 10 and 11, just talking about the security positions. The middle school looks small, the high school a little bit more, but.
That's a slight error.
Oh.
It wasn't slotted as a 1.0 FTE.
Okay.
It's FTE.
Okay.
It's less than.
That's fine.
Without that.
Okay. Okay. I was just wondering, as far as at the building level, the layers of security that exist, as far as this reduction, what does that mean within the building? And then what, if this gets reduced, what still will remain in regards to security, safety?
Well, we would remain the same because we haven't been able to fill the position for 2 years. So we got it posted and just haven't had any applicants actually until very recently, but we're not going to rehire those positions. So I think safety and security is always a #1 concern and priority, but we haven't utilized this position yet.
For us at the high school, the person that is currently in that position, hope I'm not sharing too much here, but he only plans on holding that position for part-time to start the school year because then he plans on retiring. So at that point in time, it's going to be reallocating some duties, whether it be to myself, the AP, dean of students. It's going to be a position that's missed, but because of the person that currently holds that position, it's not like you can just hire anybody to step in and replace that. So there's also been the conversations, and I don't know if I can get into this, but there's been conversations with Carver County that on the road, do we look at bringing back an SRO and having that. So not that that'll be in place probably when we start in the fall, but that would be something that looking long-term, how do you fill that need? Hopefully that might be a direction that we go. We've been very fortunate with the person that we have as our security monitor with the skill set he brings. Like I said, that's not just a position you can post and fill in. Bring somebody in with that type of a skill set.
Other questions? Do we have any precise data? I'm looking at line item 17 about how many students will be displaced if they're relinquishing and eliminating the Spanish and French for grades 6 and 7 and then 8th grade. Any specific numbers?
Right now, and typically, well, in 6th grade, world language is a required course, it's not an elective course. And so with the course option, with the course elective options going from 2 to 3, that's part of that reduction. It's a reduction in half the time FIAD, and it's a reduction in world language required instruction. And so it'll displace the whole grade, which was previously receiving either French or Spanish. And in 7th grade, it becomes an elective option for students. And currently between Spanish and French, we roughly have about 80% selecting it. And that is a choice between more FIAD or world language. The choices are going to be more limited moving forward. And again, reducing from 3 offerings to 2, and also reducing from 4 offerings, 1 per quarter, to 3. And so there's things that have to move out. And then 8th grade, with the reduction, and again, we typically have 80%. Our world language teachers do a good job of maintaining kids and engaging them in the program to continue the program. When the other option is FIAD or world language, we have 80% choosing world language right now. We'll be able to maintain a Spanish offering that will look at mirroring the current Spanish 1A1B at the high school, with discussions of that potentially being a credit-based course, as long as we're able to mimic the instruction that's at the high school level, allowing those students then to start in Spanish 2 as they enter freshman year. But it would be displacing our French classes, which usually is running in 2 to 3 sections per grade. So say 2 sections in 8th grade, 2 or 3 sections in 7th. 7th's a really big class right now. But you're figuring 90 kids probably displaced going from 7 to 8 with no French. And then it's about a similar percentage of about 4 sections in 6th. But as you move from a required, more kids say, I'm going to hold off on language and take more FIAD. So does that give you some numbers? Okay.
The discussion tonight is based around data, hard numbers. But I'm just curious, with the reduction in support staff and with the restructuring of schedules and that, how does that impact a teacher's average day? I mean, for personal time, for prep time, bio breaks, what's going to be the follow-up from that?
Currently at the middle school, individual preparatory time is 45 minutes. In the proposed model, it would actually be 52 to 55. So it'd be a 7 to 10 minute daily increase in individual preparatory time. It would eliminate that collaborative planning time, which I know our core teachers have utilized, really effectively to work together, to work on common planning, to work on supporting the needs of kids, determining interventions. So those types of conversations will have to be potentially relocated and definitely reconfigured for efficiency. There'll be some things that just can't be done without that planning period. As far as like passing times, those don't change as far as breaks during the day. The biggest thing, one of the things to mention too, is like our current encore teachers are teaching 295 instructional minutes. They'll be moving to 285. And so there's a little different of a shift in the amount of instructional minutes to make it equally balanced across all the teachers in the middle school, which currently there's an unequal amount of instructional time. But it will change for them where they teach 6 classes right now with 45s, where they're teaching 5 classes of 52s to 55s. And so their load changes a little bit, and also going from 4 quarters to 3 trimesters will eliminate a grading period. And I know there's also been some requests from our instructional staff to look at our grading practices right now to try and help reduce some of the burden of the amount of evaluation that we do and the amount of categories we currently evaluate. So there will be continued discussion about ways to support the change, because it's going to be taking on more from the instructional, the core teachers, in particular. Anything more than that? Paul, do you have anything you want to add?
It doesn't change what we're currently doing because we're not going through the whole model shift that they are at the middle school. So the prep time and schedules that we have at the high school would be the same as what they were this year.
Keith saying same at the elementary.
Other questions? On secondary?
So we still gotta do athletics, right?
Yeah. Any other questions on the secondary? All right, let's move on to.
I'm gonna volunteer this information because I'm guessing this might be the one that you might get a phone call on, and that's our parking passes. Just so you know, in comparison, we're looking at $150 a year, or we prorate it by the trimester. For that being the PSUO student that schedule may change, or the sophomore who turned 16, the third try of the school year can buy just a trimester pass. You compare that, the next closest is New Prague, it's $180 a year, and they're going up with theirs. Jaskachan are $240 a year. You go to Orono, it's $270 a year, $275 at Wilmington schools. So in comparison, I just wanted you to have those numbers in comparison.
Any other questions? All right, let's move on to the final category sheet that we have, which is in athletics and activities. Questions in those proposed budget reductions.
Sorry, my girls aren't in sports. I don't know some of this, their art. So I'm just wondering, especially with 12, which is a big one, do we have current programs where kids who may not, are there like scholarships and things like that, like for families that may not be able to afford this? Because I'm sure some families are more than happy to do this, but I'm just curious about that.
Thank you. Great question. Currently, yes, we have a couple different options. Each year we apply to the State High School League Foundation for grantee application for those scholarships that we might be able to provide our student participants, as well as Backyard Wishes, obviously has been a huge support in our community. And then also discussions in regards to funding that we could do as a department to indeed make sure that the sole purpose would be to refer to all activities, meeting the needs of those that might need a scholarship.
There was quite a bit of discussion about that. We need to make sure that we're very deliberate about finding a very non-intrusive way for making sure that students who are participating in activities get to continue to do that independent of these fees, that we are not pricing people out of it. It is critical that kids participate in activities and they explore their passions outside of the classroom, because we know kids who are involved in athletics and activities are more successful in the classroom. And so we have to make sure we build out that respectful communication process to ensure that people are not scared away by this if there's an inability or a need to be supported within that the general population doesn't need to know about. We just need to make sure that every kid who wants to play basketball gets to come out and play basketball.
Other questions? Can we open up for general questions then?
Well, I had two, but let's just start with what is with, great, so if we implement this whole thing through tier 3, what is our projected time to getting back to starting to add stuff back in? Like how many years are we out? And then as a aside to that, if we implement it only in tier 2, how many years out are till we're out of the statutory operating debt? If we do tier 1, which I don't think is an option, but if we did tier 1, how many years out are we? Or how close are we? Because like as we make decisions, if we want to put things back in, how many more years is that extending everything?
Thank you, Jesse. So throughout this process, in our minds and in our hearts, we want to get out of SOD. And we realize how painful it is to implement this process. We're not the only district that is undergoing this. I want to put it in context. Wayzata is going to be implementing this as well. $6 million year 1, $2 million year 2. That's Wayzata. Population wise, it's 11,700 kids. My prior district, Dinah, is also implementing this as well. $4 million. There has been historically 2% increases in state funding. This year, with all 3 layers of government being the state party, and again, I'm not going to get political, but the chances are there for a 4 and 2. Best situation, if we ever get a 4 and 2, we can get out of this in year 2. That's if, but keep in mind, it's negotiation season. And in our district here, all of the contracts are negotiated and settled same year, if not tiered out. If it's gonna be a 2 and 2, which we're forecasting, 2 and 2, that's in the sake of conservatism, we're gonna get out of this possibly year 2, year 3, depending on negotiation. That is on the tier 3. The hybrid model, tier 1 and 2, I have it here for us to get out in year 3. But keep in mind, we're gonna have to do not a large cut, not a $4.75 million, but we're forecasting maybe $1 million, $1.5 million to help us get out because cost of doing business. And I'll also keep in mind that throughout the 5 years that we've been in SOD, there's a compounding factor as well throughout all of this. So we want to get out as fast as possible. Tier 1, we're not going to get out until year 4, year 5, according to the other model. A long time to get out. It's going to be painful and it is hurting, no doubt about that. But throughout this teamwork process here, we went line by line, we teamed up, we strategized. I mean, we would compliment each other left and right. We were meeting almost around the clock, emails, phones, in order to implement this process. Our hope is as fast as possible. And our hope is to get tier 3 so we can get out of this within 2 to 3 years.
So just one more add to that question. There's obviously a whole lot of depends. And when we're here a year from now, we may have to, like you said, run a process that hopefully isn't 4.75. But the more we're able to write things now, the more we're going to be able to level off the plane a heck of a lot faster than we are at the present time. And as you said, we don't know necessarily what we're going to get from the state. 4 and 2 is a projection that's out there with some reduction in the cost subsidies. There's also potential additional mandates that are coming in that we may have to cover that would impact our budget in that the additional resources are to spend on additional things. For things like unemployment benefits that have been talked about for summer for our non-year-round workers, or and again, like Ron, not talking about the political merits of it, it's a reality that would be potentially something we have to pay for as a result of some of the additional money. So I would say every year we can come back to the table and say, was there an unintended consequence, and we want to put something back in? Absolutely. But our financial situation and projections at that moment in time will determine if adding that item means we need to remove another item from our system in order to pay for that, so that we continue to make progress towards financial appropriateness. As Ross said, we want to do this as fast as possible, but we certainly want to make sure that we're making good decisions that are not going to have long-term negative consequences. And that's where, again, I think when we look at this plan, are there consequences? Absolutely. And again, I'm not going to soft sell that. This is difficult, but I do think it's manageable. And like I said, otherwise we wouldn't be presenting that tonight. So again, that's why I just say, if we say we do all the way to 4.75, that's $2 million revenues over expenditures as we're projecting this coming year without knowing what the state's gonna come up with. And again, what that's gonna look like necessarily a year from now, because as you said, we're gonna negotiate all of our contracts this year. That obviously has an impact on the bottom line. Not suggesting what that should mean, simply saying that's a reality. That's 80% of the cost is salaries and benefits. That is going to have an impact.
Other general questions? All right, I know that it's a lot to digest for all the board members here, so we do have some time built into our calendar over the next 2 weeks in order to go through this, ask other questions, really get your questions to the administration if you have other questions that come up. And we are looking at holding a couple of additional meetings. So our second agenda item here is to finalize the agenda for our March 20th public comment session. So concluding the work session tonight, my understanding is that all of this information that we are receiving as a board this evening will be put on the district website, correct? And it's live right now, so anybody could go right now and see the total list of proposed budget adjustments and the budget adjustment fact sheet, which is up there as well. Also, my understanding is that this session is being recorded and will be available for people to view afterwards. Is that correct? Yes, okay. So this session will also be out there. So if anyone from the public would like to watch it afterwards, that would be welcome. Now, moving on to that, finalizing the agenda, we have added a March 20th public comment session, which will be next Monday evening. And I believe it's at 6 p.m. The location would be at Laconia Middle School, and I'm going to turn it over to Superintendent Gersich to just kind of go over what that session will look like.
Thank you. So correct that, what we'd be looking for is an opportunity for the public to weigh in and share feedback on this plan. And like any other public, it would really parallel like public comment that you would have at the beginning of a business meeting, but that would just be the entire agenda would be for public comment. So again, the rules of public comment would be similar, that people have an opportunity up to 3 minutes to speak and share their thoughts with the board. That is a time for, again, the board to listen as opposed to engage in dialogue or others. Again, following the typical rules of what you would look at for public comment during the board meetings. What we'd be looking to do is it would start at 6 o'clock. We'd be asking for our board members and some of our administrative teams to try to start showing up around 5:30 to greet people as they come in. We would have people able to sign up in advance using a link on our website that I believe again is live right now to sign up to speak at that. We would probably start with those when it comes down to calling people forward for public comment. But people would also be able to have the ability that evening prior to the start to sign up to speak as well. If they want to, we'll have cards that we'll have dispersed throughout and collect those so people have an opportunity to sign up that way to speak as well. We would generally, from an agenda perspective, have a call to order, pledge of allegiance, some general introduction comments. I think I talked with the board at a previous meeting about kind of some of the slides that would try to help ground us. And again, briefly talking about the history and how did we get to this point in this position, what went into this process, and a little bit about, the 101 of our budget and school budgeting in general. And then at that point is where Chair Geller would basically, we'd have a couple of microphones and invite people to the microphone to share their thoughts. They would have their 3 minutes to speak. Certainly if people brought forward written comments and either ran out of time or wanted to submit that, you can certainly accept those things. And we can make sure that the board members would have copies of the totality of what people might have to share. Jess would support us in helping us time things out so that Dana would be able to listen and then know based on her timing when someone's time has expired to try to be as orderly as we can in that regard. And that's, I think, just the general, vibe of it. Again, for anybody who comes that even just sign up or signs up in advance would be given an opportunity to speak. There will be a kind of a cutoff for that sign up period, but after that, the expectation would be we continue until the last speakers have their opportunity to speak. And then I would certainly expect some closing remarks from Dana, and then we would conclude for the evening. So that's kind of the general plan for that public comment and certainly open if there are pieces people believe that we are missing. I didn't necessarily get into the whole setup of everything, but we can sort of talk about those details if people want to as well. Just as an aside, our principals, our site leadership is also going to be prepared to have opportunities internally for people to come forward, ask questions, offer feedback even in advance of that, so that we're doing some of that within our own team and capitalizing on people who I think have been very engaged with this process. I've attended a number of these meetings and I appreciate that engagement. We'll certainly continue to have those opportunities internally as well, and as needed, share some of that feedback with the board.
Go back into the buildings and did more for that, or I don't know if that's feasible.
Yeah, it's from a timing perspective, that's going to be complicated. But what I am going to try to do is really purposely get into buildings and just do site visits more informally during the day and be around. And I would encourage people, if you've got feedback, questions, comments, to approach me. I just realize sometimes the timing, if I go into a classroom and somebody has students in front of them, they're not going to really have that ability. But from a timing perspective, no, this is something where we're going to depend on some of our administrative team and our district leaders to be able to facilitate those simply because of the ability to get to them. I mean, it's been a great experience. We've appreciated being out there. We appreciate how engaged people are when they attend those meetings. It's just very difficult, to schedule those 6 meetings over the course of the period of time with all of the other pieces to this that are kind of coming together over these next 2 weeks.
Other thoughts on public comment session, which will be held next Monday, so it's a week from tonight. All right, any additional comments, anything? All right, well, the board greatly appreciates all of the time and effort the administration has put into this plan. And again, reiterating, we know that this is not an easy ask of the administration to do this. So we really just appreciate all of that. And we look forward to the March 20th, the public comment session, to get feedback from the community on this. And following that, we would have a deliberation time on, I believe it's set for Thursday, the 23rd. So, and that will be again, a meeting for the school board members then to kind of come together and discuss any additional thoughts, concerns, issues that have arisen over the course of the week and a half. So, right.
Just in that regard, from the team's perspective, it would be a matter of saying whatever feedback you end up with after the 23rd, that would potentially then impact our proposal that we would bring forward for final consideration on March 27th. And then at that point, we'll be looking for board action, again, accept, reject, modify, hopefully some form of moving us forward, because on the 28th, there are, again, a lot of those items where people have unanswered questions. What does it mean for the totality of 7.0 at the high school, or the 7+5 at the middle school? And who is that? Those can only start to be resolved when we really know where this lands and we start to do that staffing process. And so it is important for the system that we start moving forward with whatever the plan ends up being, so we can start to answer some of those unanswered questions. Some of the things within the list are very clear. We know what that is. Others are not, because of the way seniority, licensure, and other things work. We have to go through that process.
Thanks for the clarification. Any other final from the school board? All right, then we will adjourn for the evening. Thank you, everyone, for your time.